Gundam the Witch from Mercury, aside from being a goddamn mouthful, is the best giant robot series this year because Gundam does it best. It's what I would say if it were actually about giant robots and not anus Voldigold with robots attached. Gundam seems to want to ape on what every schlocky light novel does by placing the main character into a Yuri couple immediately upon the first episode's end and have it take place in a high school complete with a first episode bully and all. Well, I mean, he's not wrong. It's not inherently bad, and in general, I didn't dislike the first episode, but when coupled with the prologue, it does feel a bit disjointed, and it seems as if there's a disconnect between the staff. The first 15 minutes of the prologue are normal political Gundam stuff, and it's a complete fucking snooze fest that even starts with annoying techno babble that no one gives a shit about. It goes on to improve in the remaining 7 minutes of the anime, but it's here where the disconnect really shows. Jesus fucking Christ! The action in this half was very raw and real, but the writer clearly thought that the idea of a 4-year-old piloting a giant robot and murdering people was this super cool thing and not silly at all. But it was when taken at face value, so the director instead portrayed it as this really unnerving, creepy moment where this innocent little girl is casually murdering people in space while counting to 3 as the mother watches on in horror. Look, they're just like candles! And it's 10 out of 10 A+ stuff while being absolutely fucking hysterical. That disconnect between the writer thinking it's cool but the director trying to make it unnerving leads to this unintentional hilarity where the epic choir music only makes it all the more funny. In comparison, the first episode doesn't have any moments like this and it's just played straight. This does lead to it being a more solid viewing experience, but it lacks anything that pushes it over the edge into good or bad territory. It does seem as if the writer is just writing a love letter to revolutionary girl Utano, which doesn't automatically make it good, but is also taking what that anime did and throwing some other good ideas into the pot and trying to cram it all together into a magic high school setup, and it just isn't working out so far. Because they don't know how to make it all work, they're just rolling with these inherently silly ideas without fully playing into them and instead just playing them straight. You have to fucking fight just to say sorry. It's so stupid. The director, on the other hand, seems to be going for a more grounded Gundam story to the point of even having an older character call out just how silly the entire dueling and high school system is. It 100% feels like it's channeling too many things at once while only partially understanding most of these concepts, and that's on top of the aforementioned writing having a disconnect from the direction, leading to moments like Eri being a fun and goofy weirdo, but at the same time being too socially bashful to follow through on anything. The setup is ripe with unnerving contrast, but they constantly recoil away from it just as it's starting to go somewhere, and its innate silliness doesn't mesh well with the serious, unnerving feel of the prologue, yet at the same time, it seems like that's what the show's going to try and be later on, which would be extremely jarring because these two things just don't mix, and that's ignoring how silly the main villain's motivations are. Robots shouldn't kill people, people should kill people. On the upside, the art and animation are very crisp, and the mechs are primarily 2D, which is always a plus. The show does feel a bit masturbatory towards the Gundam, as they suck its robocock every time it's on screen, but it doesn't ruin anything for the most part. The fights so far have also just been beam spam, but they do look pretty cool with excellent cinematography and direction, so it's a joy to watch, and while the writing may be poor, the direction is very solid, and it complements the OST extremely well, which itself is also very well done. The anime as a whole does seem a bit wishy-washy on where it wants to go, and it's a bit too nonsensically goofy when it's going to try and get you to take the politics and warfare seriously later on, but it was a decent watch, and I can see it improving as it goes. But honestly, I wish that tomato would squirt on my face. Gundam the Witch from Mercury is both a great show that really leans into its strengths, but also a very bad show that doesn't do that all the time. When it focuses down and allows its story and characters a chance to breathe, we get things like, so I can suck your clit. But when it doesn't, you get poorly written dialogue that sounds very unnatural because it's trying to cram in as much exposition as possible, and it in general feels as if they took the concept of a Gundam show and then crassly crammed it into a generic magic battle high school to appeal to the youth, and then instead of just making it fun, they spend half of an episode trying to explain to older viewers how it's totally not just a clumsy mashup of ideas, but instead serious world building. Hello, friend who has been going to the same school as me and knows everything I do. Can you believe that you're as good as the rank of the company that recommended you? Yes, other friend with silly hair. I can hardly be proud of being born on Earth. Why are you both talking like that? It's very forced and overwrought, and it should instead be handled the same way they do the bad guy, where they'll spend 5 minutes explaining to him why the robot isn't a Gundam, and he'll just go, fuck you, it's a Gundam. What do you think, you're a king? Fuck yes I do. Which is hysterical in how the rest of this silly premise should be handled, rather than showing one guy being mean to an Earthian, which is all you need to infer the obvious, and then immediately showing an entire scene with forced and unnatural dialogue just to hammer home that one point. Fortunately, that's exactly what they do in episode 3, because while a main bulk of my issues came from how they mishandled the prologue and now episode 2, episode 3 is absolutely stellar and allows the story and characters to breathe, letting their silly nonsense play out for pure entertainment. They do the same thing whenever the super serious bad guy is on screen, and he's an absolute treat every single time. But episode 3 is when they really let the dumb teenagers just be dumb teenagers. Yo bro, you fight pretty good, marry me. And it's great primarily because of all the natural chemistry the characters have with each other, like Tomato constantly bullying the bully on accident. The silly corporal political technobabble can also work and still be entertaining at the same time, as seen in The Meeting in episode 2, but it's leading with it, like they did in the prologue, or trying to bend over backwards to explain its silly setting, rather than just rolling with the innate silliness that makes it a drag to watch at times. But it seems like they're improving on these fronts with every passing episode and really leaning into their main strength of overdramatic teenagers that skip the dating step and go straight to proposing to whomever they meet, and also this guy getting slapped. Funny every time. When it allows everything to speak for itself and be itself, as it did in episode 3, it's a goddamn treat and one of the best shows airing this season, and it's embracing these things, as well as making Tomato get rid of her goddamn stutter, that makes this go from a series filled with Utena references, even down to the main girl making everyone join her harem, and to something actually comparable with it that matches all the flair that Utena possessed. She ate him with her sister's tits. The anime is definitely a lot better off focusing on silly teenagers, the main draw they're going for, rather than the corpo political world building, but I believe that it can do both by simply allowing the silliness that's ingrained in the show to play out by having the fun juxtaposition of the adults being obsessed with political maneuverings and corporate standing, whilst the teenagers are just being silly, horny teenagers. Yo, she called her a slut. Gundam the Witch from Mercury? Yes, I'm gonna say that every time. Has continued to be an absolute treat with how great some of the comedy is. Yo, that girl's fucking dead. That I'm sure it's being completely intentional with. Probably. The characters have all been fun and fantastic, but the pink Pomeranian is a bit annoying with how one-note her character has been so far, with her entire personality being suspect. But they did manage to make it entertaining by having her beat the absolute shit out of some bullies. The writing itself in this episode was rather poor, however, as the entire thing was primarily just a contrived setup to have Tomato join the Earth House, to the point where even the test that they took didn't make much sense. But while there were certainly better ways of handling it, it was a nice touch to have Tomato actually break down and cry from all the attempts to show that she's not perfect. Her struggle is understandable, and it's refreshing that she stayed in character and broke down, rather than being a super cool shonen protagonist about it like she has been up until this point, which has clashed a bit with her character. Imagine if those tears were semen. However, her stuttering gimmick is still a bit annoying, as she already has the muttering under her breath and speaking at an uneven pace thing in her speech to display her social anxiety. So adding the stutter on top of that is a bit overkill, and it's a very lazy way to try and display it when it's not even true to people with actual stutters, and rather a general affectation used just to try and endear you to her, thus making it feel lazy and tedious and fall flat as a result. But I bet the vibrations feel amazing. Likewise, the exam they take in this episode made sense until they were allowed to retry 20 times, but they're basically raising child soldiers and using their silly squabbles to control larger parts of the corporate government, as seen in episode 1, so it does make sense when viewing it through that lens that they wouldn't want to just fail and presumably expel students outright. But it's still a bit silly and nonsensical, unlike this scene where Tomato is afraid of the goat, as goats do indeed eat tomatoes. I will be your downfall, Suletta. The Earthian and Spatian squabble wasn't too on the nose blatant with the racism, except for Pink, who made it her mission to have it be very in your face, just like she did with this girl, which did make it a bit annoying. And overall, this show still seems to face the issue of not completely committing to one side or the other, silly magic high school hijinks or actual serious wartime Gundam plot, but the show still manages to be entertaining despite that, with Tomato being a tomato. Oh no, they bruised a tomato! The lack of actual Gundam fighting is a bit lackluster, but considering that that's likely all the second half of this show will be, I'm fine with this slower burn pace, even if some of the characters are objectively awful. Yo, how'd she get her hair in there? And the writing is a little iffy with episodes like this one. The comedy, intentional or not, is still great, and most of the characters are a joy to watch with proper and well-written characterization. Honestly, my only real complaint is that it's not silly or out there enough, as it's trying hard to half and half the silliness and corpo-political seriousness, but it's not working all that well, with this episode being a good example of that wishy-washiness, what with how the test seemed relevant to test their skills, but in reality, it was in such a nonsensical format that it only really existed as a writing device for Tomato to grow on the earth. Despite that, the character writing is fine and just needs a few tweaks, and the overall direction the show is going in just needs to be refined a bit, but it has the potential to be a diamond in the rough, and Tomato has the potential to be a ripe tomato once the show gets its engine going and stops meandering through everything. Just look at her. Gundam the Witch from Mercury has been an absolute treat to watch every week, but it does have its downsides that I can see some people not enjoying because they have shit taste. Fortunately, however, while I was previously enjoying this show despite its glaring flaws, this latest episode managed to be an improvement in every sense of the word, and it has me hopeful that the series will continue in this direction and that Tomato continues to wear shorts. The character designs are good enough to carry the show on their own. I want to fuck. And their interactions are so fun that I can't help but ignore that it's not the best written thing out there. Oh, he's so adorable. While episode 5 was more of the same and slowly had me dropping the series from a 6 to a 5, episode 6 was the best we've got yet that blew every other episode out of the water. Hey, wait, where's the other girl? The direction was fantastic as it managed to perfectly intermix the mystery behind Tomato and Ariel, the serious corpo plot with Tomato's mom and Ellen's company, and it even had perfect comedic timing with Chickenhead randomly appearing in scenes to show that she wasn't invited, and Bolly being kicked out and forced to live in the woods. This is best girl. The writing actually did its job for once as well by intriguing me as to what was going on outside of Tomato just being a silly goose, as the mystery between Ariel and Tomato intensified in this episode, with the prevailing theory being that Tomato is not Eri from the prologue, but rather Ariel is Eri and Tomato is more like Ellen in the sense that she's a clone of sorts designed to look like Eri. That doesn't jive with me though, as it doesn't really make any sense. We already saw Lifrith in the prologue bond with Eri and allow her to pilot it, something that was impossible for her mother, so it's more likely that Ariel and her gun bits each have the souls of children from Vanadis and or Mercury within them, as seen in her fight with Ellen, and that's what allows her to pilot a Gundam without using permit score and thus frying her brain, which is additionally why it doesn't emit a strong data storm because there are technically multiple pilots. I wanna fuck this vegetable! The episode, however, does consistently lean into the opposite theory of Ariel being Eri and Tomato being someone else, and this is even shown at the end of the opening where Eri is looking at Tomato and Chickenhead with the school behind them before turning the monitor off and showing her reflection, almost as a way to say that she's always watching through Ariel. Furthermore, I'm sorry, November's rough. We have the scene from episode 5 where the fortune teller girl's rock lands on 12 and she inquires if Tomato has a brother. This is just foreshadowing to the fact that Ariel has 11 gun bits and makes up one herself, which further hints that Tomato has 12 brother and sisters, as she even refers to her gun bits as everyone when fighting, so it's very possible that Ariel is, in fact, the original Eri, which is why Tomato is called Suletta and not Eri, rather than her mother just hiding her identity for other reasons, like, you know, because she's a murderer. Personally, I believe that Ariel is just like the gun bits and that she has a random child soul in her, and that's why Tomato connected with her when she was a child herself and when Ariel was Lifrith, rather than Ariel being the original Tomato herself. But the fact that the writing for this show has me thinking that much on how the mystery could go either way, theory crafting what could happen due to subtly throwing in different hints throughout the episode without calling attention to them, just means that the writing is that much better in this episode and is absolutely superb. The direction likewise did as it should, unlike other episodes, and complemented it masterfully, making for an almost perfect episode complete with a birthday barbecue and all.
Happy birthday.
Happy birthday. That scene alone masterfully intermixes everything it should by showing you a tender moment with Ellen remembering his mom celebrating his birthday just before in the scene prior, to Tomato waiting patiently for him to learn more about him, singing happy birthday in tandem with him unknowingly as we watch him get vaporized, and then Tomato wonders if he's going to return. It's excellently written, directed, and paced, and it makes for an absolute 10 out of 10 scene that seems completely intentional, unlike a similar scene in the prologue where it happens to her father and it feels unintentional because they were going for sad, but it came off as unnerving. Would that make him a farmer? However, they knew exactly what they were doing here, and this episode intermixes everything I've been saying it should, where it manages to be serious, funny, and intriguing all within the same episode without half-assing all three and feeling as a result. Hopefully it continues along this path and becomes one of the best shows this season, but click here for another one.